The myth of the eternal girl. There's a certain kind of woman who never seems to age, not in body, but in spirit. She's vibrant, magnetic, maybe even intoxicating. The world adores her, the way she laughs too loudly, the way she walks into a room like the moment itself belongs to her. Yet behind that shine, there's often a quiet heaviness, a sense that something isn't growing, something isn't moving forward. It's as if she's caught in a loop, beautiful, admired, but strangely suspended between youth and womanhood. This is the archetype Carl Jung might have called the Puella Aeterna, the eternal girl. Jung never said sexually attractive women never mature. That line is a distortion. What he did explore was how some people, men and women alike, get trapped in what he called archetypal patterns. These are deep psychological blueprints that shape how we live, love, and understand ourselves. The eternal girl is one of those blueprints, an image of youthful charm and emotional immaturity that can become both a protection and a prison. It's not about physical attractiveness, but about a psychic resistance to adulthood, to commitment, responsibility, and the deeper self-knowledge that maturity demands. But here's the twist. Our culture rewards this eternal youth. We sell it, we worship it, we turn it into a brand. In movies, advertising, and even dating culture, the forever young woman is idealized, while the maturing woman is often sidelined or erased. Jung's insights, though over a century old, cut straight through this illusion. He wasn't condemning women. He was trying to map the unseen forces that keep people from psychological wholeness. In that sense, exploring this eternal girl isn't about judgment, it's about freedom. It's about asking, what happens when we mistake the glow of youth for the work of growth? 1. Carl Jung and the architecture of the psyche. To understand Jung's ideas about emotional maturity, we first have to understand how he saw the human mind. Jung believed that the psyche wasn't just a tangle of thoughts and memories, it was an ecosystem. At the surface sits the ego, the conscious I that manages our daily lives, our decisions, our sense of control. Surrounding it is the persona, the mask we wear to meet society's expectations, how we want others to see us. But beneath that, buried in the deep waters of the unconscious, live two more powerful forces, the shadow, containing all the traits we reject or repress, and the self, the totality of who we are, both known and unknown, light and dark. For Jung, the journey of life, what he called individuation, was about uniting these parts. True maturity, in his eyes, wasn't about age or social milestones but about integration, acknowledging and reconciling every fragment of the self. Most people, he believed, never get that far. They identify too strongly with their persona, the version of themselves that earns approval, and spend their lives defending that surface identity. It's safer to live on the mask than to face what's underneath. But growth requires descent into the shadow, into the parts of ourselves we're afraid to meet. When Jung spoke of immaturity, he didn't mean childishness in the ordinary sense. He meant a psyche that hasn't dared to expand beyond its comfort zone, a person who hasn't confronted their unconscious. In this sense, the eternal girl archetype isn't unique to women, men too can live as the pure eternus, the eternal boy. Both represent souls stuck at the threshold of adulthood, not because they can't cross it, but because crossing means losing something they're not ready to let go of: innocence, beauty, freedom, or the illusion of control. 2. The path to psychological maturity. Psychological maturity, according to Jung, isn't something that just happens with time. It's a confrontation, often painful, with the truth of who we are. To mature is to step out from the safety of fantasy and into the weight of reality. It means seeing not just what we want to be, but what we actually are, including the parts that don't fit the image we've spent years constructing. It's a movement from external validation toward inner authenticity, from projection toward self-awareness. In short, it's the slow, often humbling process of becoming whole. This journey often begins with a crisis, the moment when the persona starts to crack. Maybe it's a failed relationship, a loss of youth, a sense of purposelessness, or the growing realization that life isn't unfolding the way we imagined. Jung called these moments calls from the unconscious. They're invitations to grow up psychologically, to reclaim the parts of ourselves that we've ignored. But for someone bound by the eternal girl archetype, these calls can feel unbearable. They threaten the self-image that gives her identity and power, the admired, desired, forever young self. To face them would mean risking that image and stepping into something unknown. Maturity, in Jung's view, is never about rejection of youth but integration of it. The mature woman, or man, doesn't kill their inner child, they learn to guide it. The vitality, curiosity, and passion of youth aren't lost, they're deepened by wisdom and groundedness. But when someone refuses this process, they become locked in one dimension of the psyche. They repeat the same emotional patterns, relationships, and self-deceptions, never moving past the stage of early promise. The tragedy isn't that they stay young, it's that they never grow into the fullness of who they could be. 3. Anima and animus, the inner masculine and feminine. One of Jung's most intriguing and controversial ideas was that every psyche contains both masculine and feminine elements. He called these the anima, the inner feminine in men, and the animus, the inner masculine in women. Together, they form a bridge between the conscious mind and the unconscious, helping us relate to the opposite sex and to our own inner complexity. To become whole, Jung argued, each person must confront and integrate their inner counterpart. That means, for a woman, developing her animus, her assertiveness, logic, independence, and for a man, engaging with his anima, his emotion, intuition, and empathy. But when this integration doesn't happen, imbalance sets in. A woman overly identified with her persona, say, as the charming, attractive girl, may project her unintegrated animus outward. Instead of drawing on her own inner strength, she looks for it in men, idealizing or resenting them depending on how they respond to her needs. Her sense of identity becomes relational rather than internal. The result is dependency, not always material, but emotional and psychological. She orbits around others' attention because her sense of self isn't yet rooted in her own depths. This is where Jung's framework connects back to the eternal girl. The Puella Aeterna is not simply vain or shallow, she is psychically incomplete. Her undeveloped animus leaves her unanchored, relying on charm and youth to maintain control over her world. She seeks to be desired rather than to be. True maturity, in Jung's sense, would mean facing and integrating this missing masculine aspect, standing firm in her individuality, developing discipline, and cultivating a sense of purpose that isn't contingent on approval or attraction. Until then, she remains divided, radiant, yes, but fragile beneath the glow. 4. The birth of the Puella Aeterna archetype. The Puella Aeterna, or Eternal Girl, wasn't one of Jung's original major archetypes, but it emerged naturally from his ideas and was later developed more fully by his student Marie-Louise von Franz. The term mirrors the pure Eternus, that eternal boy, which Jung used to describe men who resist responsibility, remaining trapped in a romanticized idea of youth. The Puella is the feminine version, she's captivating, full of promise, but allergic to the gravity of adulthood. She's the personification of potential without permanence, always at the beginning, never in the middle or end. In literature and myth, the Puella shows up everywhere. She's Persephone before her descent into the underworld, untouched by shadow, light on her feet, defined by her beauty and possibility. She's the muse, the ingenue, the dream girl. She represents inspiration and vitality, but also fragility and avoidance. Von Franz wrote that the Puella lives in a dream of eternal youth, where time doesn't touch her. Her tragedy isn't that she's unloved, but that she cannot stay, because to remain untouched by life's demands is to remain unreal. The world moves forward, and she must either grow or disappear. Jung and von Franz saw this archetype as both a blessing and a curse. It grants charisma, charm, and creativity, the spark that draws people in. But without inner grounding, it becomes a psychic trap. The Puella lives through reflection. She sees herself through others' eyes, through admiration, through the roles she plays. She never quite finds her own center. Her fear of aging, of routine, of depth, all stem from the same root, a fear of death in symbolic form. 5. Cultural worship of youth and beauty. If Jung's Puella Aeterna was a psychological pattern, modern culture has turned it into a religion. The worship of youth isn't just aesthetic, it's economic and systemic. Advertisements, films, and social media all sell the same myth, that youth equals worth and aging equals decline. Beauty industries thrive on the fear of fading. Social validation systems reward the image of eternal freshness. In this environment, it's not hard to see why the Puella archetype doesn't just survive, it flourishes. Society feeds her, praises her, and punishes her the moment she tries to grow beyond her role. Jung would likely have seen this as a dangerous collective projection. When an entire culture idealizes one stage of life, it loses balance. The shadow of that worship, the part we don't want to see, is our terror of decay, imperfection, and mortality. We've turned youth into a shield against existential truth. The result is a kind of psychic amnesia. People remain caught in the surface of identity, in the endless pursuit of staying visible, staying desirable, staying young. Maturity, reflection, and wisdom, the very qualities that Jung associated with individuation, are quietly devalued. For women, this pressure is particularly sharp. They are often taught that their value peaks early, tied to appearance and allure. The Puella Aeterna archetype becomes less a personal fixation and more a cultural script. To reject it can feel like social exile, to embrace it means self-erasure. This double bind keeps many from psychological freedom. Jung's framework helps us see this not as individual weakness, but as a systemic distortion of the psyche, one that rewards immaturity because it's easier to control, easier to sell, and less threatening to the established order. 6. Psychological costs of eternal girlhood. Living as the eternal girl might look enchanting from the outside, spontaneity, beauty, attention, but internally, it's exhausting. The Puella's life often swings between euphoria and emptiness. Because her identity depends on external validation, she constantly needs new mirrors to see herself in, new admirers, new experiences, new excitement. When the novelty fades, so does her sense of self. This is what Jung would have called a failure of centering. Without a connection to the inner self, life becomes a performance, vivid, but hollow. Emotionally, this state can lead to dependency, anxiety, and deep loneliness. The Puella fears being ordinary, yet the constant chase for meaning through others keeps her from true intimacy. She may attract intense relationships but struggle to sustain them, because commitment requires surrender, the one thing she resists most. Jung described this as a refusal to engage the unconscious, the deeper, darker, more stable layers of the psyche. To the Puella, that world feels suffocating. To Jung, it's the doorway to real transformation. Over time, the mask of the eternal girl becomes harder to maintain. Age, loss, or failure eventually confront her with the truth that no one can remain untouched by life forever. This confrontation, painful as it is, can also become her salvation. If she accepts it, she begins the descent Jung described as the second half of life, the movement from image to essence, from performance to authenticity. But if she resists it, she risks becoming a ghost, a person frozen in self-image, forever chasing the reflection of a girl who no longer exists. Modern reinterpretations and feminist perspectives. In the decades since Jung's time, psychology and feminism have both revisited and challenged his archetypes. Critics argue that some of Jung's frameworks, rooted in early 20th century gender norms, risk reinforcing stereotypes rather than transcending them. Yet, when reinterpreted symbolically rather than literally, the Puella Aeterna remains strikingly relevant. It describes not a flaw in women, but a universal human dilemma, the struggle between the freedom of youth and the responsibility of growth. The eternal girl archetype isn't an accusation, it's a mirror. And in the mirror, modern culture still sees itself. Contemporary Jungian scholars and feminist thinkers have reframed the Puella as a byproduct of patriarchal systems that prize women's appearance over their depth. When society offers women limited scripts, beautiful, desired, forever young, it's no wonder some internalize those roles as identity. Jung's insight becomes especially meaningful here. He believed that what is repressed in the psyche eventually emerges as symptom. In other words, a culture that denies women the space to mature psychologically will produce individuals who feel trapped in perpetual adolescence, no matter their age. It's not personal pathology, it's collective neurosis. But modern interpretations also find empowerment in the archetype. Some women consciously embrace their Puella energy, not as immaturity, but as creativity, spontaneity, and resistance to conformity. When integrated, the eternal girl becomes the part of the psyche that refuses to settle for dead routines, that demands life remain vivid and emotionally honest. The difference lies in integration. When the Puella works in harmony with the mature self, she becomes a source of vitality. When she dominates, she becomes an anchor holding the psyche in shallow water. Jung would say that wholeness requires both the lightness of youth and the gravity of age. Conclusion: growing beyond the archetype. In the end, Jung's ideas about the Puella Aeterna aren't about women who fail to grow up, they're about what happens to any of us when we confuse the image of life with life itself. The eternal girl is a metaphor for every person who clings to a role, an identity, or a fantasy because the unknown feels unbearable. We all carry some version of her inside us, the part that wants to stay admired, untouched, safe. And yet, Jung's message is clear: individuation demands risk. To mature is to shed the skin of who we thought we were, and to step into the unsettling, liberating space of becoming. For women, this process often means reclaiming what society discouraged: ambition, independence, depth, even anger. For men, it can mean confronting their own pure eternus tendencies, the fear of commitment, the addiction to novelty. Either way, growth begins when we stop outsourcing our worth. When we turn inward, we meet not just our shadow, but our power, the strength that doesn't fade with youth, because it isn't built on the approval of others. It's built on truth. Jung's vision of maturity is radical because it's not about conformity, it's about self-realization. So if the eternal girl lives in our myths, our movies, or even in the mirror, Jung wouldn't tell us to destroy her, he'd tell us to listen. to let her teach us what she's really afraid of losing. When we stop fighting time and start understanding it, youth and age stop being enemies. They become partners in the same dance, the rhythm of growth. And maybe that's the final paradox Jung wanted us to see, that the only way to stay truly alive is to keep dying and being reborn within ourselves, over and over again.